Peace be unto this house. This is just a friendly talk concerning the history of the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Watchtower organization's foundational doctrine that the Lord Jesus Christ made an invisible return to the earth in 1874. There's a wise old saying by the circus man P.T. Barnum: you can fool all of the people some of the time. Some of the people all of the time, but not all of the people all of the time. Please keep this in mind as we look at the true history behind how the Jehovah's Witnesses came to this doctrine. When your source of JW history comes from the Watchtower organization, the closet doors are all closed and locked. What happens in the Watchtower stays in the Watchtower. History is easily changed with the printing press and millions of gullible sheep. The sheep would rather be lied to than have to face the truth about the Watchtower lying to them. Anyone researching outside of the Watchtower Inc. for true historical information will find it. The background for this doctrine started before the Watchtower's founder, Charles Taz Russell, was born. In the year 1822, an American Baptist preacher, William Miller, began preaching that Christ would return sometime between March 21st, 1843 and March 21st, 1844. Miller suddenly rose to stardom, and close to 50,000 people put their trust in Miller's forecast. March 21st, 1844 passed without incident, and further discussion and study resulted in a brief adoption of a new date, April 18th, 1844. Like the previous date, April 18 passed without Christ's return. Miller responded publicly, writing, "I confess my error, and I acknowledge my disappointment. Yet I still believe the day of the Lord is near, even at the door." Miller, this Baptist minister, was willing to admit that he made mistakes, but he was still looking for the return of the Lord Jesus Christ. I can really respect a man like that. When Christ did not appear, most of the disappointed Millerites flowed back to their own churches. But some of the Millerites grouped together to form the Advent movement. These Adventist groups included the Advent Christian Church, the Life and Advent Union, the Seventh-day Adventists, and many small independent groups. Miller died in 1849, but his disciples continued to make spectacular forecasts concerning the return of the Lord Jesus Christ and the end of the world. The printed newspaper was the best form of mass communication at that time, making spectacular forecasts concerning the return of the Lord Jesus Christ and the end of the world sold papers and grew churches overnight. By 1865, at the end of the Civil War, different Adventist groups published their own newspapers and focused on the return of the Lord in 1870, others in 1873 and 1874. Jehovah's Witnesses founder, Charles Taz Russell, was a disciple of the Adventist movement. As a teenager, Charles Taz Russell continued to study under Adventist teachers for some time, and at the age of 18 organized a Bible study group. To Adventists, he gave credit to guiding him into greener pastures, were Advent Christian Church minister George Steston and Bible Examiner publisher George Storrs. After 5 years in Bible study, Russell, at the age of 23, was elected pastor of the Bible study. A group of Adventists forecast that Jesus would return in 1873. When he did not show up, Nelson H. Borah founded a magazine called The Midnight Cry and moved the date to 1874. No one saw the return of Jesus in 1874. Borah changed the name of the magazine to the Herald of the Morning and printed that Jesus really returned in 1874, but it was an invisible return. In December 1875, Charles Taz Russell read about the invisible return of the Lord Jesus Christ in 1874 in the Herald of the Morning, and located Barboa to compare notes concerning this. They met in 1876. The magazine almost completely failed financially because most of the magazine's readers just stopped buying the lies. By the summer of 1876, Russell became an assistant editor and a financial backer of the magazine. Barboa, the editor, wrote that the Lord made an invisible return in 1874, but the saints would be called away boldly 3.5 years later to be with the Lord in the spring of 1878. The rapture did not occur as expected, and Barboa and Russell split. Barboa had new revelations to account for the lack of the rapture, but Russell and the others rejected the revelations. Charles Taz Russell started his own magazine and published the first issue of this new magazine in July 1879. The Zion's Watchtower and Herald of Christ's Presence was not designed to be an Adventist or Millerite magazine, but he first marketed to those some of the people that can be fooled all of the time. He focused on the readership that believed the invisible return of Christ in 1874. Now let's go back and look at the timeline here. A group of Adventists announced that Jesus would return in 1873. When Jesus did not return on that date, Nelson H. Barbora founded a magazine called The Midnight Cry and moved the date to 1874. When no one saw the return of Jesus in 1874, Barbora changed the name of the magazine to the Herald of the Morning and printed that Jesus really returned in 1874, but it was an invisible return. In December 1875, Charles Taze Russell read this in the Herald of the Morning and located Barbora to compare notes concerning this in 1876. Russell financed the magazine and became its co-editor until 1878. When Jesus did not rapture the church in 1878, Barbora changed his positions on the ransom and atonement and then came up with new revelations, which Russell, of course, rejected, and the two parted their ways. Modern tabloids use UFO abductions, Hollywood gossip, and Elvis sightings to sell papers. Nelson H. Barbora, a professional magazine editor, used spectacular claims about the second coming of Jesus to sell his papers. Charles Taze Russell published the first issue of his own magazine in July 1879, the Zion's Watchtower and Herald of Christ's Presence. Russell propagated the message that Jesus made an invisible return in 1874 that he had only read about in December in 1875. Russell had no first-hand knowledge or revelation in the invisible return and absolutely no evidence or visible testimonies of the return of Jesus. After accepting as truth the message of Nelson H. Barbora concerning the invisible return of Jesus, Russell rejected Barbora for his constantly changing doctrines and revelations. Which brings me to a question, my friend. Can you tell me the difference between a fairy tale and the doctrines of the Jehovah's Witnesses? A fairy tale starts out with once upon a time, and J.W. doctrine starts out with Jesus made an invisible return to earth in 1874. Now, doesn't that remind you of the emperor that bought a new set of clothes that only the wise men could see? The cornerstone doctrine of the Jehovah's Witnesses is the invisible return of the Lord Jesus Christ in 1874. This foundational doctrine has no evidence, scriptural, spiritual, or physical. The doctrine originates from Barbora, a man that was rejected by Russell for forecasting a false return day of the Lord Jesus Christ. I can see the humor in that one. But why do millions of Jehovah's Witnesses believe the Watchtower without question concerning the accuracy of his doctrines? As P.T. Barnum said, you can fool some of the people all at a time. Most churches have leaders and doctrines and a flock before they start printing a magazine. Charles Taze Russell, a Bible study pastor with a 7th grade education, became a professional publisher. He published his first issue of his new magazine in July 1879, the Zion's Watchtower and the Herald of Christ's Presence. Russell printed the claim to his readership that Jesus made an invisible return in 1874 in order to sell his newspapers. But don't take my word for it. You can Google these historical names yourself. It will be a lot of fun. If you want to hear more about Russell's spectacular claims to gain readership, how he became God's mouthpiece, and how he used the measurements of the Great Pyramid to forecast the visible return of Jesus and the end of the world, 1925.
Lord of eternity, mystery behind the veil, Lord over heaven and earth, God of Israel. Come with your wisdom and power, clothed in your honor and strength. Lord, hear the cry of our hearts, come, O conquering King. And every eye